DevOps, DevSecOps, BizDevSecOps. Whatever you call it, you know it's the sexiest job since slicing bread. And now you want to get in. If you are from the IT field and looking for a step-by-step guide on how to get started in DevOps, this video is for you. If you're not from the IT field and still looking for a step-by-step guide on how to get started in DevOps, this video is for you. If you're looking for allied DevOps role that are not too technical in nature, this video is for you. Let's get started. The perspective. As always, let's start with the perspective, the thought process on how to get started with DevOps. Depending on your background, there are some prerequisites that need to be met for you to get started on a DevOps roadmap. Let me explain to you with the help of a flowchart. Here we go. I want to build a career in DevOps. That's good. Do you have a background in IT? If you do, then follow the DevOps prerequisite roadmap. These are all the prerequisites that you need before you can deep dive into DevOps. Do you understand the DevOps prerequisites well? If you don't, then study the prerequisites and come back again. Now, if you don't have a background in IT, that's okay, but have you played around with software? Are you familiar with how software is created? Have you, on your own, built something in software? If you have, then it doesn't matter if you have a background in IT or not. You can still start with learning the DevOps prerequisites and get started from there. The only issue will be you will not have a computer science degree, which is a prerequisite for a lot of large institutions. But having said that, in 2023, skills outmarks a degree at almost all places. And I'll talk more about that as we go along. So have you played around with software? If you haven't, then are you really sure about this? Are you really sure that you are from a non-IT background? You haven't played around with software? Are you sure you still want to get into DevOps? If you're not sure, then get out of this loop and then come back to this video. Otherwise, sorry my friend, there ain't a magic wand that I can give you. That's how it is. Let's go ahead. If you're really sure, then what you have to do is study the prerequisites and then you are ready to step in. Okay, let's move forward. So if you understand the prerequisites well, do you want to go into core DevOps role? Now this is an important segregation. What I mean by core DevOps role is roles like a DevOps engineer, a DevOps architect, and so on and so forth. That is core technical work where you will be breathing technology and implementing technology day after day. So you have a choice to make here. If you want to get into core DevOps roles, then follow the core DevOps roadmap, and I lay out all these roadmaps for you. You can start a DevOps career. Now, if you don't want to get into core DevOps role, which is core technology elements, there's another option. You can follow the allied DevOps roadmap, which are built on the foundation of technology, but day in and day out, you don't have to use technology every single day. For example, roles like DevRel, developer relations, roles like community builder. For a general rule of thumb, if you're not from an IT background, if you're not too excited about playing with software, but still you want to get into the hoopla of DevOps, the allied DevOps role could be a good one. So we have to understand three roadmaps: the prerequisites, the core DevOps, and the allied DevOps roadmaps. And depending on your context, you can choose the ones which applies for you. Now let me take you through these roadmaps with my favorite tool, a mind map. Let's get in. There are 9 things that we need to learn about. Don't get intimidated, we'll go through them one by one. It starts with knowing an operating system. either a Windows or an Ubuntu or any other flavor of Linux, doesn't matter. Then it goes to GitOps, one programming language, shell scripting, database, bit of networking, how to set up various things, how to deploy an application onto a web server, and the theory of DevOps. You put all of these together in perspective and you have enough information to get started in DevOps and then take an informed call whether you like all of this stuff that you've just learned and you want to get into core DevOps, or this is too techy for you and you want to get into the allied DevOps roadmap. So let's look into them one by one. So operating system, the basics of operating systems, things like file systems, memory storage, IO management, process management, threads, concurrency, virtualization, basic stuff on any operating system. Now do this for Windows and Ubuntu. And the only way to learn this is Windows. You can read about it, you can experiment about it. I'm assuming that your personal laptop is a Windows operating system. Get a virtualization software like a virtual box or something and install Ubuntu or any flavor of Linux and then learn about these things. So what I'm giving you is the pointers on what to learn. Where and how to learn, we will talk about them as we go into the guidelines for prerequisites. When you talk about GitOps, you need to know the concept of GitOps. What is it? Why did it come from? Why distributed environments and so on? The 4 characteristics of GitOps and branching strategies. You will need to understand GitOps as you start contributing into open source code. Very, very important. The next one is about learning a programming language. And I'll give you the concept of this. You need to understand the basics of the language. Now the goal is to create an intermediate level program in that language and build and deploy it. Focus is not on mastering the language. It is not on becoming a Java or a Node or a Rust developer. The idea is on knowing enough of that language so that you know how to compile it from source. And you want to do this for at least one compiled language like a Java or a .NET and one interpreted language. Also, by corollary, it means know the difference between a compiled language and an interpreted language. Also very important in programming language is when there is a defect in the build, you should know enough about the programming language to be able to at least read the code and high level understand it to figure out if the build break is because of a code defect, a configuration defect, or because of your build scripts. Right? So now from the build scripts, you go into shell scripting. In shell, you need to know 2 fundamental things, the bash side of it and the text manipulation side of it. What do I mean by bash scripting? Any sort of structure of the bash, basic functions, variable, loops, for loop, if loop, while loop, and so on and so forth. Along with that, you need to learn about text manipulation. Things like an awk, sed, grep, sort, cat, cut, fat. I'm not making this shit up, I promise. These are valid text manipulation tools in the Unix world. Okay, now going into database. 1 NoSQL, Mongo, Cassandra, anything is fine. 1 SQL database, a MySQL, MariaDB, Postgres, anything is fine. Now again the thought process. The goal is not to become a database administration. The goal is to understand the fundamentals of database and how they operate. The second goal is to understand how DB admins operate their tasks in 2023. And the reason I've put in 2023 is because today a database admin does not go and run queries on the database manually. There are automated tools out there in the database world to do that. So you need to understand how database function, SQL, NoSQL both, and then what is the automation in database area. 6th, networking. Basics, OSI model, You can pick up any book, Google on OSI model, you learn what it is. DNS. This is, in my experience, the number one cause of most outages out there. HTTP, HTTPS for security, important again. FTP, TLS, SSL, all of that stuff. Then some utilities like Nmap, TCP dump, ping, traceroute, route, airman, and then some process monitoring things. Again, the goal is not to become a network engineer, but to be able to know enough to start debugging things. So when a node is not responding, you should be able to check its DNS entries. Through OSI model, you should be able to figure out its networking route. Through these utilities, you should be able to trace it, ping it, do the Nmap, do a trace route, stuff like that. So learn this from the concept of debugging and not to become a network engineer. How to set up things like reverse proxy, forward proxy, load balancer, firewall. Basic stuff that you would need to set up any enterprise application. How to deploy an application into a web server. You can pick up one or more of these web servers. Start with, in the Windows world, start with IIS. In the Unix world, start with an Apache or a Tomcat. For the programming language, for the script that you have created, for the application that you have created, now deploy that onto an application server. And as we move into the DevOps roadmap, we will automate this. Now coming to the theory of DevOps, what is continuous integration, continuous delivery, what's the infinite loop, evolution, what are the top companies in DevOps doing today? That completes the prerequisites roadmap. Guidance for DevOps prerequisites. Number 1, learn with a course. Now since you're new to this jungle, it might be a good idea to do an in-person course at a local training institute. However, you have to ensure that that course covers at least what I've laid out in the roadmap, if not a little bit more. And typically, to complete that DevOps prerequisite roadmap, I would imagine it to be a 2 to 3 month course. You don't need a 1-year course on the fundamental of DevOps. A 1-year course is good for the institute to sell. It is not good for you to buy. Number 2, focus on implementation, not theory. In all probability, at the end of all of this learning, you want to apply for the role of a DevOps engineer, not a DevOps professor. Although nothing wrong in that as well. You should know enough theory to be able to understand a subject and put it into practice. The rest you can figure out as you go along. Know enough to implement. Number 3, practice, practice, practice. That's the only way to feel confident to get out of the stage. Otherwise, 1 year later, you will still be searching for YouTube for another roadmap. Now, assuming you've completed the DevOps prerequisite, now you have a fork on the road, whether you want to go into a core DevOps or the allied DevOps. So let's start from the core DevOps roadmap. All right, there are a bunch of things in this, starting with practical DevOps, CI/CD of course, the cloud, about continuous testing, the container ecosystem, infrastructure as code, and monitoring and logging. So let's go through them one by one. So in practical DevOps, you need to know about the periodic table of tools. This has been published by digital.ai. This will give you an idea of what kind of DevOps tools are out there. Then you should look for some reference architectures, again freely available from Sonatype. You can check that out. You also need to know on what does good DevOps look like, and these reference architectures will help you understand that. And then finally, you need to learn about DevOps culture. Read some blogs, watch some videos on what the heck is a DevOps culture, why is it important, and what does it mean for somebody who's starting out on DevOps. So that's on the practical aspects of DevOps. Now, CI/CD, pick up one, maybe a Jenkins, maybe a Circle CI, maybe a GitLab. Pick up one, anyone, doesn't matter, and automate the manual task that you learned in the prerequisites. So in the DevOps prerequisites, you have created an application to do something. Here is a chance to put that application into a CI/CD model and do this on Windows and one Linux OS. Cloud, just pick one cloud and focus on that for now. Maybe AWS is a good place to start because it's simple enough. You need to know of why the cloud, how do you create virtual machines, what is networking, and go back to what you've learned in the prerequisites of networking and see how they apply to the cloud concept. And then installing software on the VM, common cloud services for that cloud provider, and how do you connect from command line. Now, cloud is obviously a very, very big and vast topic, but remember, you don't want to become a cloud engineer at this point. All you're looking for is if your organization is working in, let's say, AWS, you should know what is AWS, how to log in there, do the basic functionality of AWS, do the basic networking, and that should be enough for now. And when you go into infrastructure as code, you will learn the automation part of this. So to get started and have a basic level of familiarity, this should be good enough. Then let's talk about continuous testing. One functional testing tool, let's say Selenium, create simple test cases for the application in CI/CD. Overview of one performance testing tool, one mobile testing tool, so you get a sense of how the mobile world operates, and what are the new types of testing in the DevOps world. Container ecosystem, the basics of Docker like images, registry, network storage, overview of Kubernetes, you should know YAML, things like pod, replica sets, deployment sets, etc. Microservices architecture. That's the high level of container ecosystem, and a good idea is this build that you have created here, put it on a container ecosystem and see how it behaves. That's a good test whether you know enough about the container ecosystem or not. Infrastructure as code, concept, how does it tie in into the DevOps lifecycle, Ansible and Terraform, learn the overview, learn the difference and why do we need both, and implement infrastructure as code for CI/CD pipeline created. And then finally, monitoring and logging. Learn some basic monitoring using a Prometheus, create some dashboards using Grafana, learn about the ELK stack, some logging using Greylogs. So that's about the core DevOps roadmap. Having seen this core DevOps roadmap, you still might have a question. And the question could be, this roadmap is fine, it's a lot of stuff. How do I narrow it down to my background? I cannot learn everything of everything. This will take me ages. How do I create a roadmap for myself? Now, first things first, there is a method to the madness for learning. I call it the KSM methodology: knowledge, skill, and mastery. Understand the difference between K, S, and M and decide in which areas you need knowledge or skill, or which are the one or two areas in which you need to accomplish mastery. I have a dedicated video on this. Link will be in the description. Now let's come to how do you create your specific roadmap for your background. Now there's a very famous marketing model called land and expand. What does it mean for you in simple English? Identify your landing zone. Identify your core competency, the area that you have been working for the past 2, 5, 10, 15 years. That's your landing zone. It could be development, system engineer, QA person, a project manager, whatever it is. You get the idea. Once you know the landing zone, identify the expanding areas in DevOps. Sure, you'll have to learn a few new concepts, you'll have to learn a bunch of tools, but it will still be on your landing zone, on your foundation, and that will give you confidence. Guidance for core DevOps roadmap. Number 1, focus on specific knowledge. By now, you know what it is that you want to learn. Be specific on that and learn that thing only. Do not go all over the place. You'll get confused, bogged down, you will not learn anything. Complete one roadmap and then assess By giving a bunch of interviews. Bunch of interviews, not 1, 2, 3 interviews. Give 5, 10 of them. You will know the gaps. Come back to the roadmap, fill up the gaps. Number 2, learn from credible sources. There are tons of places of learning today. You can look up YouTube, you'll get a ton of videos on Ansible, Kubernetes. You start watching them, and halfway through you realize that they are not even providing 1% of what they had claimed. Do some research on people with good technical content and follow them. Some examples are Kunal, Tech World with Nana. They put out very high quality technical content. Learn from practitioners who are in the field of DevOps today, not from theorists, not from the professors. Number 3, don't get overwhelmed. I can understand. When you look at a roadmap, it's intimidating. There are a ton of things out there, and it's very, very easy to get overwhelmed. I have been in that situation several times in my 20 years of career. The way I have approached this: create a plan, work the plan one day at a time. Every single day, if you accomplish the goal for the day, the plan will automatically happen. The Allied DevOps roadmap. The first one, developer relations, or DevRel as it's called. Let's look at the typical job description of a DevRel. First one, open source development. Maintain the organization's open source projects. You pick up ideas from the open source pool, work with your development team to bring them to life. Second, identifying practice use cases. You liaise with the product heads to convey the customer requirements and use cases because you have a good pulse of what the customer is looking for. Engineering pre-sales, you conduct demos and proof of concepts to showcase your product's capabilities and what it can do. Now, as a corollary to this, there's writing and content creation, articles about your product, tutorials, how to do use cases, some case studies of how organizations have used your product successfully, and then finally speaking, which is to participate in local domestic events and conferences as a speaker and talk about your product and your industry. So that's the job description. Let's look at what key skills you need. So in application development, obviously you need the base expertise with your product's tech stack. Now writing is obviously a big part, and you need the ability to explain complex topics using simple words. And speaking, you should have the ability to excite an audience, of course, for your product. You get what I'm saying. So that makes the DevRel. Now let's look at the second one, a community builder and typical job description. So the first one is, of course, to develop and execute a comprehensive community strategy that aligns with your organization's goal. Second is to develop and manage events such as webinars, meetups, conferences to foster networking and engagement within the community. So community about your products and services. The third one is to establish relationships with local professionals like your referral partners, resellers, B2B influencers. Working closely with the sales and marketing team, collaborating with the product team to identify opportunities for improvement, and then finally monitoring and analyzing the community engagement. Right? So that's what a community builder does. If you look at the skills, number 1, you need to build relationships amongst your users. Analytical skills, because you need to take some decisions based on the data that you're seeing in the community. Ability to work independently and as a cross-functional team, because you're working with the sales team, the marketing team, the product team, and so on. Of course, a passion for nurturing and building communities, excellent communication and interpersonal skill. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey, I've never built a community. I don't know anything about building a community. How the heck does this apply to me? Hang on to that thought and I will address it in the next 5 or 10 minutes in this video. Let's look at the third one, Developer advocate. Job description. Now, key difference between developer advocate is that this guy is internally focused to developers in your organization, whereas a community builder is focused externally outside the organization. In the job description, you'll see engage with the developer community outside to improve affinity towards your product, capture feedback from them, and drive to respected product teams. Listen to what the developer community is saying. Maybe they're noticing some bugs, they want some features, drive it from the product team. Utilize your defect zero mindset to test product usage scenarios. Because you're working with the dev community, you know how they're using that product. So you use those scenarios to test your product internally. Establish thought leadership with developers at events. Collaborate with DevRel team because they will need a bunch of things from your developers. So get it done for the DevRel team. And then you yourself have to write some blogs, tutorials, videos, and enhance the documentation. So that's the typical job description. The skills, of course, number one, understanding of your product tech stack, communication, deep understanding of developer communities. This is important, not just self-driven and work independently. You have to maintain strong visibility internally and to external developer communities. These are not the roles that are done in a silo. These are not the roles which are done asynchronously. These are very high visibility roles. This is what an Allied DevOps roadmap looks like. Guidance to Allied DevOps roadmap. As you now understand, there are several roles in the Allied DevOps roadmap space. I've just listed 3, but that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. Now you can research these and get more traction, look at some job opportunities in this area, and you'll figure out what I'm talking about. Although they need base technical skills, they rely on other skills like communication, driving, writing, brand building, and those kind of skills for you to be successful. If you're not from an IT background and you don't want to get into core technology, the DevOps Allied ecosystem is a good place. You still are in the broad DevOps spectrum and you leverage from it, even though you're not talking core technology. How to stand out from the crowd. At this very moment, there are probably 1,000 engineers out there searching for a DevOps roadmap. Some of them might even have looked up the roadmap, almost implemented it, finishing it, and they are ready to start applying for jobs next week. So the question is, how do you stand out from all the crowd that is there? If you've noticed an underlying pattern in all the job descriptions that I've shown you, it is this. Jobs today are increasingly dependent on your external perception and projection of knowledge. It's not enough to know a thing. It is equally, if not more important, to tell the world that you know it. One very effective way of doing this is learning in public. Here are some ways of learning in public. Writing blogs, tutorials, ask and answer things on Stack Overflow, Reddit, stuff like that. Make YouTube videos, do podcast, Twitch streams, start a newsletter, heck, even draw cartoons. I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, who the heck am I to talk about all those things? There are probably far more qualified people than me to be teaching about these things. It doesn't make sense. Read what I just said carefully. Learn in public. It is not preach in public. It is not demonstrate in public. It is learn in public. There is a technical term for what you're feeling. It's called imposter syndrome. The way to think about this is as follows. When we talk about something, when we teach something, it's kind of obvious to us. We do not appreciate what's obvious to us can be amazing to others. I read this in a Derek Sivers blog a couple of years back. What is obvious to you is amazing to others. Ali Abdal, who's one of my favorite YouTubers, puts it rather nicely. It says, this is the idea of the curse of knowledge. Once we know something, we think it's not interesting. And we think, surely it's obvious. Everyone must know that thing. For me, imposter syndrome was starting this YouTube channel. I used to think there are already tons of YouTube channels on DevOps itself. What can I talk that's not been spoken about earlier? Am I even really qualified to talk about this? And as it turns out, 4 months and 20 videos in, I'm still going on. And now I understand that I'm not even gotten started on where I want to take this channel. Let me give you some more examples of how to stand out from the crowd. Let's say you saw a YouTube video on any technology, anything, right? Reach out to the speaker, the instructor, and thank them. And then ask them a question. A reply on YouTube, look up their LinkedIn, reach them out on LinkedIn, send them an email. Try stuff. For open source, do open source contributions. Reach out to people. Ask for help. You will be surprised on how approachable tech superstars are. They are not Shah Rukh Khan where you can't reach out to them. You reach out to anybody who's famous in the tech world with an honest enough question on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Discord, and high chances they will reach out in some shape or form. If you like a project on GitHub, clone the stuff and see it from scratch on how to build it. Hopefully, this video has shown you a step-by-step guide on how to start your DevOps career. Let me know in the comments below if you want me to do a deep dive on any specific topic. Head over to my channel for more awesome content coming week after week. See you in the next one. Cheers. Bye.